I think the last time we spoke was pretty much this time last year, just before Daniel came out over here, and you had just finished the shoot for Archenemy. You were just about to go into editing. The world stopped. Do you have to do all the editing like remotely? Like what was that?
Yeah. So we shot it in December and in January, and then in February, exactly a year ago, the gears were just starting for post-production, and then pandemic hit. So we did all of the editing remotely. And to this day, I have still not met my editor in person, Lana Wolverton. We only have communicated. She would share her screen, her Avid, and it actually turned out to be great. Like there was nothing negative about that process. I woke up in the morning and I laid down on the couch and I opened up my screen, and then there she was. And, my producer was able to come on. Like it was actually pretty smooth doing it that way. But it was, thankfully we had this technology and we were able to do it. It got a little hairy when it was the audio, the sound mix and stuff like that. I actually went to the sound mix a couple times wearing a full gas mask. So there's like pictures of me sitting, talking to the sound designer, and I look like I'm in the middle of a nuclear riot. But yeah, we were able to pull it off, in that, our animation team was made up of 3 people from around the world. One was in India, one was in Chicago, and one was in LA. And so we were, we zoomed everything together. It was kind of, I guess looking back on it, it was kind of, an interesting approach, a different, sort of meta concern about a movie that has to do with where is reality and are we in space, or, so we were able to pull it off. And I just, my main takeaway was, thank God I got to shoot this whole movie before the pandemic hit. It was really a blessing to be spending so many months of what is now early pandemic, spend so much of that time, really hardcore working on a project, and not having to like put my head up out of it and say, oh, the world's all fucked up for quite a while. It was really a blessing whereas I knew friends who, were halfway through shooting something and it got shut down and they just, had to freak out. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up, loving comic books, so how does it feel now that, you yourself have made a comic book movie?
Oh, it's so exciting. Yeah, the real sort of, the real thrust of Archenemy for me was trying to do a movie in a way that like the comic books that I liked as a kid did comic books or did superheroes, like taking aesthetic risks or playing with what does this character mean, and sort of questioning what a superhero is and this kind of thing. And so it's a really fun thing for me to be able to think to myself, oh, I made a superhero movie. Which is like, well, nobody hired me to shoot, the Dazzler movie, so I had to invent it myself. But I think that was the appropriate way for me to do a superhero.
Yeah, I mean, it's a superhero film, but it's not, I guess, a superhero film how people know them today. I find it to be more of like a modernized version of the films that came out pre-MC Universe. So, a little bit of The Punisher, The Crow, Spawn, Watchmen, grittier, realer world. What made you decide that you wanted to attack it from that angle?
Yeah, and there's a movie, it's not very well known, but Takashi Miike made a movie called Zebra Man. That it's a very cool. I remember seeing that when it came out because I'm obsessed with Miike and thinking that's a cool way to do superheroes. Yeah, I mean, for me it was because I love superheroes. I love the kinds of stories they can be. I love what the most interesting comic books have done with them for decades, and felt like what we had started to miss in the movies was the idea of asking, what can we do aesthetically? Like how could we treat these stories in a totally different looking and feeling way? Because that's what excites me about making movies, is what does it feel like? And I felt, it's like, whatever you say about Marvel movies, they can be exciting, it can be a huge story, but they do tend to feel the same. And maybe you love that feeling and maybe you don't, but I wanted to make something that felt like a movie that was fucking with the form, or like what would, I kept saying this thing, like, what would it be like if early Wong Kar-wai had made a superhero movie? That would have been weird. Like, what would that look like? And And the comic books that I grew up with really did that. They really attacked, you know, what a superhero could be or what it could look like in all of these different ways. And I felt like, well, let's bring this superhero movie audience along on this ride of, well, we all know what it looks like when you get bit by a radioactive spider, but what does it look like if, you know, you don't even know whether or not reality is real? And what if it feels more like a crime movie? You know, what if it feels more like Point Blank or Michael Mann movie? Like, why not do that with superheroes? You know, and that was sort of the fun challenge going into it.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of played with the you know, conventions and stuff and expectations by, you know, casting Joe Manganiello, who, you know, let's face it, you know, he is, you know, your Batman, Superman sort of aesthetically, you know, looking guy. But then in this, you know, he's really gnarly, you know, he's really broken down. You know, when did you realize that, you know, he could pull off this, you know, edgier role?
Yeah, I know. I love that about Joe. I mean, you meet Joe, he is like literally the most handsome man on the planet. And you know, I guess when you look at Archenemy and you look at Daniel, I really like this trend I'm on of working with just incredibly handsome men of all ages. It's really my thing now. Yeah, with Joe, you know, he comes ready to be a superhero. He looks like Superman. But he is a really deeply well-trained theatrical actor, you know, and he used to do a lot of like Tennessee Williams, and, you know, you could see him in Streetcar Named Desire or something like that. And so he was excited by the idea of getting to be an actor first and like a hot body second, because you know what I mean. And so he was so excited about being gnarly. He was at one point, he was like, what if I have 3 of my teeth ripped out? And we were like, I don't think you need to do that. I think we could do that with some prosthetics, you know. Like, he really got into the gnarliness of it. And but what I love about that is that you can see the possibility of the Superman in there. You know, even on a meta level, you go into the movie like, oh, it's Joe, he is Superman, and then you meet him and you're like, oh, he's homeless, that's weird. But you know that the possibility is in there, which I think is maybe part of the idea of the movie is, you know, look at anybody living in a tent on the streets of LA. Maybe they could be Superman, you know, and for Joe to sort of, and then, you know, like you say, it's kind of a sneaky superhero trope that it's like it's his secret identity. You know, normally Superman is pretending not to be Superman by being a bumbly guy, and Max Fist's thing is sort of the opposite. He's like desperately trying to tell you his real identity, but it's a secret because you don't believe him. And Hamster is kind of like, you know, Jimmy Olsen in Superman, who wants to write about him, but instead of thinking that Superman is amazing, he doesn't quite believe him. And so it was fun to play with all of those sort of like levers that you have. But Joe, it was just the great. I want him to be like my Ryan Gosling, you know. I just want to do like so much more cool, weird stuff with him. And I think and he also, you know, he loves to fight. He loves to just get in there and knock people around and punch and shoot guns. And, you know, he does it all of those things.
I mean, as much as it, you know, it is about a story about Max, it's also, you know, there's just as much time spent with Hamster and Indigo. So in many ways, you can sort of watch the film, and it's 3 main characters and not just the one. You know, was that always your intention when you were scripting it, that, you know, you wanted to tell it from, you know, this sort of superhero story, but from 3 different perspectives? Because you've got Hamster who believes, and Indigo that's like, what? So.
Absolutely, yeah. I loved the idea of doing a movie that was kind of like an ensemble story, you know, or maybe sort of bait you in like, oh, this is a story about this superhero, but the important thing about a character like that is how other people perceive him, and do they think of him as a hero, or do they think of him as a crazy person? And I think in particular for Indigo, that ultimately, you know, she's in a story where Max isn't even the most important thing. Her story is not even revolving around him. Her story is revolving around, how do I take care of my brother, and how do I deal with these bad guys? And you could just as easily, I think, see her as the protagonist of the movie. And I love the idea of playing with that structure, you know, and sort of getting out of that. I think with, you know, Daniel Isn't Real, which is a movie that obviously I love so much and I loved making it, but it was like, so much about the whole premise was we are stuck in this one person's point of view, and it's a narrow, kind of miserable, dread-filled point of view. And so it was so exciting for me to be like, what if we have a scene over here with this cool girl with blue hair. And then what if we go over here and have Glenn Howerton in a car talking to Amy Simons, and just kind of being able to open up a world and sort of make a movie about a city full of these weird characters was just felt so like freeing and exciting. And I think that, like you say, it does give, you know, maybe every viewer to the movie like a different, everybody can have a different main character, or see the movie as being about a different person and choose, you know, sort of the point of view they want to run with.
Yeah, I mean, you're a very visual filmmaker. So when you sat down with Archenemy and the script, you know, were there any images that sort of popped into your head that eventually made it through onto screen?
That's interesting. You know, I was very obsessed with the idea of the kind of the shittiness of it. You know, like there was an image early on I saw of like a closed down strip mall, broken asphalt, and a person pushing a shopping cart, you know, and just like the emptiness and bleakness of that, I thought was so interesting. I was like, this, you know, and I always had this image, you know, the whole movie was driven by the image of a guy sitting at a bar drinking whiskey, wearing a superhero cape that was all sort of in tatters. And it's funny because that was sort of that was the premise image for the whole movie. And then we don't actually have that exact scene because he doesn't wear the cape in the bar, but he does, you know, go on that long walk where he's drunk and he's wearing the cape. I think that was like a really strong image for me. And then thinking about the kind of imagery that I've seen in crime movies was really the thing that was driving me, you know, or in a movie like Leaving Las Vegas. I think that, you know, it's a movie just about a guy drinking himself to death, but the lights behind him, the Vegas lights and the jazz music make it feel so exciting that you have these two feelings of like, am I depressed and is it tragic, or am I elated and it's exciting? And I think that was the kind of thing I was thinking about with Archenemy was, well, the city is going to be really grimy and gross and horrible, and he's kind of a drunk fuck up and nobody likes him, but I'm going to use an aesthetic that makes it all exciting nonetheless. And then you have those two competing feelings.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with the visuals, I really loved how Chromium, you know, the story of that is told, you know, via animation. And I know that you're a big fan of Pink Floyd's The Wall. You know, there's obviously a lot of inspiration been taken from there. Was it always your intention to make this a mixed media format film, or, you know, did other things come into play?
It always had to be that Chromium had to look as different as possible from the rest of the movie. Because when I was writing the script, I didn't yet have an idea for how we would do it. And my concern was, well, the movie starts in Chromium and there's superheroes and they're flying in the buildings. And if it looks really real, then is it going to create this question enough? Or you're going to say, well, I just saw this whole thing and it's a movie, so I believe it, you know? And so there was always this question of like, how do we do it? And we didn't initially think it would be like 2D animation, but I knew it had to be totally, I think there would probably have been a version of this movie where it could have been like, the real world looks even shittier and was shot on like 16 millimeter. And then Chromium was like IMAX and awesome. And, you know, I think that's a way we could have gone too if we had had 10 times the budget. But I think the idea, like you say, I mean, I wonder at what point in my career I'm going to stop ripping off Pink Floyd The Wall, because it destroyed me when I saw it as a child. And now I'm just trying to create that same kind of traumatic experience for everybody else. But yeah, the idea that, and I also talked about it in terms of like Roger Rabbit, you know, that like this animated world would sort of have its tendrils in the real world. And I think it allowed us to do something that definitely felt different, so that you're not automatically thinking, oh, well, obviously it's real. You're thinking like, what even is it? I had no idea I was going to be watching a cartoon all of a sudden in this movie. I think there's something jarring, and you know, and my obsession with like, it's only going to be two colors and these really bright neon color and make it this like immersive thing. I think the idea was always like, I don't want it to be too legible. I don't want it to be too clear. I'm not interested in clarity. I'm just interested in like, you know, the feeling of it. And luckily we got this guy named Danny Perez, who was one of the team of animators. He's also a filmmaker, and he's a very psychedelic dude. And so he was able to bring us a lot of these like really weird strobing, you know, cosmic
Yeah.
type stuff.
I mean, the sound as well is a really important, part of this film. It's almost wall to wall, music or sound design. And, there's some really intense sound design moments in there as well, which really immerses you, in this world. How did you and the sound team and the, your composing team work together to make what was, it was like an oral delight?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you feel that way. Yeah, that was something that was, something that's so important, I guess, and it's like, I wonder someday if I'll ever make a movie that's just quiet and actors can talk and everything isn't like in the background the whole time. But yeah, I just love the idea of creating an experience that totally pulls you into it, and hopefully you see it in a movie theater, and it just becomes your whole world. The composer Umberto, who has made all these records that sort of like they sound like 70s Italian horror movies, but they're all his invention. He clearly, from his music, he has this sense of like creating worlds with the sound, and so we talked to him, and I Daniel Noah from Spectre Vision is always very involved with the composing and the music. He introduced me to Clark for the last movie, and he's a really important part of the team. And so we would talk to Umberto about like, what does this alien planet sound like? What is this, if it's powered by crystal energy, what does crystal energy music sound like? And kind of trying to build it from there. And I was very obsessed with thinking about krautrock, bands like Can, from the early 70s in Germany, because they were a kind of music that was both cosmic and psychedelic, but also really grimy, like just sweaty guys in leather biker jackets, sweating in a club in Berlin, but also playing this cosmic music. And I felt like that juxtaposition felt to me like what Archenemy was. And Umberto was a big fan of that music, and you can hear it a little bit, it's like Hamster's theme, and it's got kind of like a trap hip hop beat, but it's also got this thing that kind of sounds like Can. And I think it was about, gosh, as it always turns out to be with me, it was like, how do we connect the psychedelic and the cosmic to something that's kind of like gnarly and personal? And that was how we approached the sound and the music as well.
I mean, your films always have an element of ambiguity, particularly to do with the validity of the hero story. Is Daniel real? Is Max a superhero from another planet? Why do you, like challenging, your audience in this way? Because obviously they get to watch it, and, one person can go, yeah, Daniel's definitely real. And another person can go, no, he isn't. One person go, Max is just, he needs to seek help. Why do you, like challenging your audience so that, they read things in these ways?
I think it comes from a personal place where I don't know the answers to things myself. I find reality to be confusing and strange. Why are we here? What do we know? What do we know to be true? I don't know. And so I think that sort of philosophical anxiety I feel like, well, I can't present something where everybody knows what's going on, because I don't even know what's going on. And so I'm always hoping that it will, these movies will, talk to other people who sort of feel that same way, who feel this sense of like that there's an ambiguity to reality that can be really quite, disconcerting, whether it's this era that we are in of fake news and everybody sort of battling to control the narrative of reality, to just simply wondering, like, I did not choose to live in this city. You live in London still, right? And like, that's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Where the fuck did all these streets come from? Why are they here? I think there's just a general sense that I have of wondering what we can take for granted and what reality is. And so all of my characters wind up plunged into a sort of epic version of that same concern.
I mean, when the world eventually opens up again, what are you hoping to create next?
Well, so Brian, who wrote Daniel Isn't Real with Me, he and I wrote a new movie called Cash Diabolic. It's a modern very fast moving, scary horror movie, very horrific horror movie that's about witchcraft and the origins of capitalism, like how capitalism emerged from the witch hunts, and sort of connecting the idea of black magic and money. And that is a movie that we have some financing in place for, and we're trying to put it together. So hopefully that's something I'll be able to shoot in this. I kind of have this fantasy of going and shooting it in New Zealand where they have no COVID problems, because that would be delightful. But we'll see. So, that's one thing that's like at the forefront. And then, one thing that's been really interesting, especially after putting out Archenemy, is that producers and executives are seeing me in a slightly different way, because you go, oh, well, that's not a horror movie. So now, oh, I guess he likes to do action or science fiction or whatever. So I am looking at all these new projects, and sort of, the other lovely thing of having made a couple movies that people have responded to positively is that it starts to attract other collaborators. And so now I meet other writers who have really cool scripts, and I've never been sent something this cool before. Maybe we'll work together. So that's a long way around of saying who the hell knows what I'll do next, but it does seem like there's exciting possibilities.
No, definitely. And
but it will always, it's always going to be genre. I don't know, maybe when I'm like 80 years old and can finally reflect in the wisdom of my old age, I can make a movie about a brother and sister crying, which I would love to do, but I don't know how to do it. So it's for now until the end of time, it's going to be monsters and robots.
Yeah. Well, I will always watch them, and I will always talk to you about them. So
thank you. Yeah, it's always so nice to see you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're the only filmmaker who every project I have, I've managed to snag an interview with. So
yeah,
quite nice.
Yeah, we got to keep that trend going, 100%. Yeah. If we miss one, that'll be the end of my career. So we got to make sure you always hit it.
Yeah. Well, I'm secretly a little mascot. That's what it is.